ordinary. So when I first really started to understand this concept and what it meant, it completely changed everything, the way I was doing it, and I started to look at audio in a completely different way, which is what we're going to talk about in the engineering end of this, when we get past some of the music production stuff here, or this home studio setup. So this is really key. Now the reason why, which I started to talk about, I didn't have the desk over on this side, over here, facing this direction, is that because these side walls are closer, it's more likely that the speakers coming from the other direction are going to be greater or less than 20 milliseconds. So not only, I'm always going to get reflections off the ceiling, unless I have a very high ceiling, and I will probably get reflections off the back wall, but it's the side walls. If I can prevent those, then I'm only get reflections from the back wall that are problems, and the ceiling as a problem, and not so much from the sides. Right? So basically it's just a matter of numbers. If the setup is this way, pointing this way, then I get 2 sets of early reflections from the side and off the ceiling. And that's additive. So it's more likely that you would go with the wider setup. Okay? Now, there are some other things here which we'll get into, but just from, because we're going to get into some acoustic treatments, and I'm just going to switch back here to my PowerPoint display and set this up. So this is our room configuration portion of the program here. Okay, and so I think you kind of get like some basic ideas of how the room configuration works. And the next thing we're going to talk about is speaker placement, because there's a lot of very confusing information that I've found about speaker placement, and I want to see if I can clarify some things on that end, and see how we go along with that. So let me just kind of take this guy off for a second, and let's pick up from here. Okay, so if I now take a look here, I'm going to shift something over. This might look a little weird on your side, but it's going to enable me to see something that I need to see on my end. So bear with me here for a second while I slide some stuff over. Okay, so now, when I actually am working here with some of the stuff, with the actual speaker placement, what most things will tell you is that you want to be perfectly triangulated. You basically want an equilateral triangle. Okay? So what most people talk about is that the speakers should be kind of triangulated. So let me just see if I can, I'm just going to take this and I'm going to hide this layer here so we can go back to our normal setup here. So the idea here is that if I'm working, I want all of these basic, I want this to be angled. Oops, let me just got to go here. Oh, hold on. All right, gotcha. Okay, so it's going to be equidistant, technically. That's the idea from the speakers to me. So imagine this being a perfect triangle. Now, that's not necessarily true. And what ends up happening is that a lot of people try to set themselves up that way, and it doesn't configure correctly for the room. So, in fact, what is the case is that it may be necessary for you to move your speakers closer together based off of the size of the room. So in other words, you may want to move, in this case, hold on one second, let me just kind of undo that. I'm just going to hide this layer here for a second and go back to here. So what I can do here is I'm going to take this guy and I'm going to move him. So I may want to move him closer like this, and I'm going to do the same thing over on this side and take this guy and shift them over. So it may be that the speakers need to be closer together if that's what sounds right, and that will affect the timing of the delays that are coming off the walls and hitting you. In other words, the imaging and the quality of the audio might be clearer and better if I'm here. I may also want to move my listening position a little further back. Okay, so I may be farther back in the room, okay, or I may be up closer. Now, there is a problem when you have speakers, and the size of the speakers is really important, because as soon as you have a speaker that's probably 6 inches or bigger, you need to be at least good 3 feet away from the speaker, if not more. Okay, and sometimes this can be an issue when you're working in rooms, and small rooms in particular, because you don't want to be too close to the back wall, but you do want to find that positioning with the speakers that is going to give you the most effective playback quality. So, and what you're really listening for is the imaging quality, the balance of the frequencies. And so when I move my speakers and when I set my speaker position, I will move them back and forth, in and out, closer to the wall, farther away from the wall, and then I'll keep moving my listening position back and forth. Right? And so, I may just, be sitting here in my chair, just kind of going like this, back and forth. And in the end, when I'm done, as long as the speakers are not on top of my desk, which they shouldn't be anyway, then I can move the desk out to where I am and leave the speakers on stands if that's necessary. Right? And so that is really, really important. So you want to really move around a lot and make sure that you get your placement with the speakers correct. So in big recording studios, okay, it's very often the case that the speakers, you would have more than one set. You would have monitors that would be recessed into the walls, right? So you wouldn't see it. In this case, it would be recessed into the walls, and they'd be mounted in, and they would be angled perfectly for a listening position right in front of the mix desk. And all the individual speakers, if I were to draw additional sets of monitors here, if they were smaller monitors, then I'd have those smaller monitors, here, and, so these guys would be closer than the other monitors. So this might be a pair of Oratones. If you don't know what Oratones are, they're like a small, cube, and it's a small, 4 or 5 inch speaker. Maybe it's a little smaller than that. And so they're primarily used for listening for radio, right? So, this is something that is, important. I just noticed here on the thing I was looking over, someone was asking, why should the speakers not be on the desk? Okay, there's several reasons why you don't want to have speakers on the desk. And I'll try to monitor this as I'm going along, and I'm going to open up the Q&A in a little bit so we can start to ask some of these questions with this. But one of the issues, the main issues, is reflections off the desk, and also you're going to be vibrating the desk. Also, unless your desk is incredibly deep, what's going to happen is the speakers are going to be too close to you when they're on the desk. So even if you've purchased, there are many companies that make these desks where they have little leaves where the speakers go onto. One of the problems is that it's going to resonate also the desk, which is going to make it vibrate, which is going to affect the audio quality in a negative way. Ideally, you want to put them on stands that are isolated from the floor. So typically, stands that you would purchase would be, they would have, like a main thing here. They would have a base, and usually they would have some kind of thing. You may not see it just like this, but it comes out to points, or it may be made with rubber, right? And at the bottom, and then you would have a stand here, and your speaker would be placed on top of this, right? And there you may even have like a foam pad that's underneath here. So what happens is you're trying to minimize the amount of vibration that transmits from the speaker into the floor. And when you're on the desk, it's just vibrating the desk, right? And you're getting the reflections off the desk, which is a problem because that's another form of delay, because you got the sound that would bounce off the desk and then bounce right back up to you, in addition to the sound that was heading directly to you, right, from here to here, right? So that's one of the main issues, right? So unless the speakers are very small, and even if they're very small, I typically try to avoid that. You could put like little computer speakers there and get away with it, and it's okay. So in an ideal situation, you would put them there, and you would not want to mount them onto the wall for the same reason, unless you can isolate them. One of the problems in speaker placement with the speakers being too close to the wall is that when the speakers are too close to the wall, then the sound resonating from the cabinet bounces off the wall and creates a form of what's called constructive interference, okay? And that will give a boost to the low, mid, and low frequencies coming into the room and make the room and the walls resonate more. And that's why you kind of want to be careful to keep that distance of your speaker away from the walls as much as you can. And you have to play with that. So you will have to, having stands also gives you the flexibility to move the speakers out into the middle of the room a bit more and move your desk setup back and just kind of keep moving it around until you find the position that sounds best, okay? So that constructive interference here of the reflections coming back is really key. And the bigger the speaker, the bigger the problem that is. When in recording studios, they would actually create what's called a soffit in a so let me just see here. I'm not sure why I'm getting my pen. It's missing. Hold on 1 second. Okay. So when I'm actually dealing with a studio, I may have in a recording studio, they would have soffitted walls, and these soffits would actually be acoustically isolated, right? They would be decoupled from the walls, and they'd be filled or packed with foam, so the speakers sit on top of that, and they don't resonate the walls. So they're just recessed into the wall. And if you've ever been in any of the big studios, that's quite helpful, to kind of do that. In some studios where they're freestanding, they hang them with chains, and the chains actually eat up a lot of the vibrational energy from the cabinet, and that way it doesn't resonate. So playing with this in whatever way you can in your home studio is really, really key, to kind of to getting some of these things straight here. So we'll kind of go on from this a little bit, and this is kind of like the speaker placement and the listening position we've kind of talked about. I'm just going to talk briefly about equipment replacement or equipment placement, and acoustic treatments, and then I'm going to open up some Q&A here, and then we'll kind of listen. So if I can actually go over here and let me just kind of clear, wrong layer. I want to show that layer and see how many levels of undo that I have here, and kind of get rid of some of this stuff. So when we get to equipment placement, now we're going to try to deal with some of the basics about ergonomics. Okay, so once you've gotten the audio kind of thing tricked out a little bit here, then what we want to do is you're going to have keyboards. You may have keyboards. You may have some other audio gear that you have, and you kind of want to have that nearby. So one thing that I always like to do, and I'll just mention this briefly here, is I like to keep myself symmetrical to the room. And so basically, if I put a dividing line here, between my head and in this position here, let me just kind of switch over here to another thing. For some reason, I'm losing my drawing tool. Not sure why that is, but if I basically put a dividing line, there it is. If I put a dividing line that goes from here to here, then what should happen is the room should be symmetrically the same on both sides. And that's not always possible, because if you have a big closet here in the corner, that's going to create some issues. But ideally, you want the room to be symmetrical as much as possible, as even left-right as possible. And, something to consider. When you place equipment, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be placing things that you may want to put your gear off to the side. So if you have a keyboard, you're going to want to have your keyboard set up here, and maybe I'll draw in some keys here. This is going to be really ugly. And, so that when you play, you can just sort of turn to your left or to your right, depending upon how handed you are, and then you just kind of, play and then do your thing, record it, and you're basically still in the sweet spot. If you have equipment, you might have, like compressors and EQs and stuff like that. You may have it over to the other side to balance this out. Or you may have it built into your desk or underneath the desk, which I kind of like, because underneath the desk kind of gets it out of the way acoustically from things that are going on. So the things that you need to do most or be around most, you're going to kind of want to put around you or nearby so that you have good access to it. So especially with the equipment, if you're tweaking or working with a compressor or an EQ setting, you want to be in the best listening position possible when you're making those adjustments, right? Because as you move around the room, the sound quality is going to change a bit. Okay? So that's my quick thing on that. And the next thing that I'm just going to go over real quick here is going over some where you place acoustic treatments. Now, because, let's see if I can call back up my layer here that had all of my things here. So when we look at all of these reflections that are coming around from the walls, what you really want to do in terms of minimizing the impact of that is to put your acoustic treatments here in places along the back wall. So this may be foam or acoustic blankets, which we're going to talk about, along the side here, right? So you're going to kind of have some things here, left and right. And so what this is going to do is it's going to absorb a lot of this energy that's reflecting off the side